The following program is underwritten by the Nevada Irrigation District. Since 1921, providing clean and healthy drinking and irrigation water to more than 24,000 homes, farms, schools, and businesses in Nevada and Placer counties.
Hi, thank you for watching NCTV Interviews. I'm your host, Sitzer, and today we are going to be educated. We have with us an illustrious panel of well-educated and professionals in the field, superintendents from 4 different districts. So I'd like to welcome, and if you wouldn't mind please introducing yourselves. Roger?
I'm Roger Steele. I'm the superintendent of the Nevada City School District.
I'm Ralf Swenson. I'm the superintendent of the Nevada Joint Union High School District.
I'm Holly Hermansen, County Superintendent of Schools.
And I'm John Byerrum, Superintendent of the Grass Valley School District.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here today. And it's a very timely program because we're looking at the state budget and how it impacts local schools, as well as talking about some of the programs that each of you are overseeing, some of the real positives that are going on locally. So Holly, if you wouldn't mind starting us out with sort of a look at the local scene.
Okay. Well, actually, Lou, I'll start by letting you know what's got us in this position of needing to have this discussion is the fact that in January, the governor proposed a budget that will result in $4.8 billion in cuts to education for the 2008-2009 school year that's coming up. So as you know, the process is that the governor proposes the budget in January, and in May he makes a revision to that budget based on current information, and then the legislature gets together and comes up with more information about that and responds to the governor. So the $4.8 billion cut is pretty devastating to California. We're already funded low. You've probably heard the statistics that California is funded at 46th in the nation, which is about $2,000 per pupil less than most of the states and the state average. So it's going to result in a significant impact to education. And I know John wants to talk a little about Prop 98 and how that works in California, because that's going to be affected as well.
So this may actually put us at the very bottom. We may go from 46 down.
Yeah, oh, well, yeah, it might. I'm not sure what other states are doing, but we're already pretty down there. And as well, California's faced with other challenges. We have higher class size than most other states in the nation. We have higher class size. We also have lower teacher to pupil ratios and other staff to pupil ratios, as well as administrators and other support staff. So we're faced with a lot of challenges that other states aren't faced with already in California, along with the fact that we have one of the most diverse populations in the nation.
Right.
So lots of issues related, so that, and then we can talk a little more in a bit about how that affects us locally in Nevada County.
Right. And John, you were going to give us a look at how this sort of budget is constructed and how how educational districts, school districts deal with it.
Well, it's tough to deal with, but, and your comment about us perhaps falling to the bottom, I don't know that we'll fall all the way to the bottom, but even before these proposed budget cuts, we've slipped from 46th to 47th in the latest information. The information that Holly is quoting is what we have received, and I hear that we've already slipped. After the budget reductions, if they are in effect put, if we suffer those larger budget cuts, we probably will fall to 48th or 49th out of 50 states, which is interesting because that means that we're actually outfunded on a per pupil basis by states that we consider to be not nearly as well off as California. If you look at Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas, Missouri, Mississippi, those states actually fund education in their states at a higher level than we do. And educational funding in California is fairly complex. Back in the pre-Prop 13 days, funding for education was determined locally and by local property tax.
Right.
Since Proposition 13, it's been turned over basically to the state legislature. And in my opinion, and many others, since that time, it's become more or less a political football. And what we found in the immediate Prop 13 days is that educational funding tended to go up and down depending upon the financial situation in the state. And it was sort of a feast or famine cycle. The voters didn't like that because overall it's not good for education and for children. You can't build and destroy programs on alternate years. And so the voters in the late 80s passed Proposition 98, and the intended purpose of Prop 98 was to guarantee education a minimum funding level so that we would be immune, and the children, most importantly, would be immune from the political swings and the up and down funding cycles that we're experiencing in other programs in the state. And so that was passed in the late 80s and actually was reaffirmed overwhelmingly by the voters of California in 2005 in response to Governor Schwarzenegger's proposal. When the voters passed Proposition 98, it was never meant as a ceiling for funding. It wasn't even meant as a benchmark for funding. It was meant as a floor to guarantee that we wouldn't suffer huge losses in education. Unfortunately, it has become the amount of money that education is normally funded at. And as Holly was saying, as a result of that, we've fallen significantly. Those of us that happen to be old enough to remember the old days, funding in California used to be the first in the nation or close to it for many, many, many years, and somehow now we've fallen to almost dead last. Just to put some numbers on those statistics that Holly was talking about, what that means in terms of California schools is that we are dead last in the number of staff per student ratios in the state. We have 30% less teachers than the average, not the top funded districts, but the average.
You're talking about in the comparatively with all the states.
Relative to all the other states in the nation, we have 30% less teachers than the average. We have 61% less school administrators, which is interesting, and 92% less counselors. And so you can see how educational funding really results in staffing and rich programs, and so that's been a problem in California. And if you look at the national average, Prop 98, by funding the minimum levels of Prop 98 over the last 20 years, means that we have about $25,000 less per classroom for every classroom in the state of California allocated than the average classroom in other states in the nation. So. It's not a pleasant statistic, and that's with Prop 98 being in full force. Governor Schwarzenegger now is proposing to eliminate or suspend Prop 98 next year. He's already done it one other time, so that would mean that in the last 5 years we will have suffered a suspension of Prop 98. That minimum guarantee, which has put us almost dead last in terms of educational funding, that one protection that we have might be suspended.
And one would have to wonder, with California being the 6th largest economy in the world, why it is that we're in this situation with education, and particularly when it has an outstanding university system, and locally somehow we've managed to skirt the impact of those low levels of funding. So. Again, just as a taxpayer and citizen of the state, one has to look at the budget and say, what's going on? So might we talk about how as district superintendents, you plan to weather this period, and what plans do you have?
Well, in December, we started hearing rumblings about the economy and how it may affect our budgets at the state level and how it would affect our educational budgets. So in our particular district, we knew we were facing quite a decline in revenues. It was turns out that we were $570,000 of lost revenues that we had to make up as a result of declining enrollment, but also as a result of the state cutting back on funding for education according to the proposed budget. So kind of in December, we went to the board and we talked about what our priorities are, and we said we wanted to protect the classrooms as much as possible, we wanted to protect our employees, we wanted to protect our programs as much as possible, and we kind of looked at our vision statement, which is building a strong foundation for learning and creativity. And so as we take a look at where we may have to cut back, we want to maintain that creativity and we want to maintain learning in our schools. So we immediately decided to have a freeze on spending, except for essentials. We decided not to, if somebody left or retired or if somebody resigned, we would not replace that unless we absolutely have to. We also decided a good way to save some money is to have an early incentive retirement package, and because we didn't project any certificated people going to retire this year. And there's a big saving if you have somebody retire and then if you hire somebody at a lower level. So we wanted to save some money in that respect. We also, because of declining enrollment, needed to lose at least 2 teachers, so we were trying to avoid layoffs, and because if we could get people to retire, we wouldn't have to have layoffs. So we were able to do that, and we were able to save quite a bit of money in that respect by having 4 people retire and take that package that would not have left otherwise. And we were able to save over $180,000 just by not replacing 2 of those staff members, and then also some savings on when we do replace those staff members.
Of course, when you do have that happen, the ratio of students to teachers changes, and you have larger classes.
Not in our particular case, because our declining enrollment made it so we needed to do that anyways to keep the ratio the same. As you know, a lot of the districts, most districts in our county had been declining for years. Nevada City's been declining like 14 years now in a row, so we're kind of used to trying to cut back. But the problem with this is a major extra $350,000 that we weren't planning on cutting, and so we really had to say no more purchasing. For instance, we were going to buy some new classroom desks in the classroom. We couldn't do that, and we're just going to have to use some that are kind of falling apart right now. And those are the types of things you had to make some savings on. So we had an administrator leave, and we have not replaced that position, so we're picking up other administrators are having to pick up some of the duties of that administrator, and we've made some reductions when people have left at the district office, reducing some hours. So that's how we're saving some money by looking at how we can reduce hours or save when people left. We're trying to avoid the layoffs if at all possible.
Well, at the high school district, we're the largest district in the county, and so we're talking about a lot of dollars when you look at the kind of reductions that the governor's proposing. Out of our $34 million budget, we're going to have to cut about $1.75 million. And as all of my colleagues here are well aware, that in schools and in school districts, about 80 to 85% of your budget in any given year is committed to the salaries and benefit costs for the people that work in that district and provide the direct services to students. So if you have to cut $1.75 million, it's going to affect jobs. Fortunately, our district has always has a real track record of fiscal responsibility and wise decision making. Assistant Superintendent for Business, Karen Syndrom's done an incredible job for us over the years, and so we had the benefit of having some reserve funds that we tried to use in the same way they did in Nevada City in terms of some retirement incentives to our faculty and our classified employees. And we didn't get much of a response from the faculty. Only one person took advantage of the retirement incentive, and we're waiting to hear next week about our classified employees and how many of them might take advantage of the incentives to retire. But we did end up having to combine the governor's bad news with declining enrollment. And so it kind of compounded our situation a little bit. And we ended up eliminating 7.5 teaching positions district-wide. We eliminated 1.5 administrative positions, and we eliminated about 4.5 classified positions. And that's a difficult thing to do. It's hard to tell someone that their job may not be there for them next year. Like everyone else, we're hoping that the governor's news in May with the May revision to the budget might hold some good news in terms of tax revenue increases. But we're also receiving a lot of advice from people that we trust that we might get worse news. And so if that's the case, it's just going to be a real tough year ahead for all of us in education in California. Should we get good news? Should there be some compromises reached in Sacramento between the Assembly and the Senate and the governor? We'll look at that list of layoffs and those decisions that were made and reduce staffing and try to bring people back as quickly as we can and try to make those decisions in a way so we can hold on to the quality people that we have. The decisions that were made were decisions that had to do with seniority and credentialing, and really some very good people were affected by those layoff decisions. We hope to find a way to bring them back.
Well, I don't want this doom and gloom message to pervade the show, because it's more than doom and gloom. Despite the declining enrollment, the region has a tremendous reputation in education. And given the fact that it's 46th, 47th as a state in the nation, I'm curious as to how it is that this locale manages to produce such a high quality of education for the students here.
Well, Ralph has an interesting statistic that might answer that. What was it? That we're the highest county in California in terms of adults who have a high school diploma. So that's one thing. I think the community in Nevada County values education highly. We have supportive families and a supportive business community that helps support our schools. And I think that all impacts it. Even though you're right, it's amazing that we're funded so low, but we're doing so well. And I think it's a commitment to education in our community. I think we have very committed staff that work with the students in our schools, and we just value education in our community so much. So
I'm kind of the new kid on the block, I just started last summer here as the superintendent for the high school district, and it did not take long to pick up on what Holly's referring to, the commitment to education that's really spread throughout our community. And even though we have a lot of real interesting political diversity in Grass Valley, Nevada City, and the surrounding areas, there's certain things that everybody shares. And one of the things they share, I think, is a commitment to providing kids a great experience in the schools. We're so proud of our schools. You look at the arts programs, the dance programs, vocal music, athletics. There's something for every kid. And there's groups of adults in the community who will step forward and provide those extra dollars and those extra hours and the energy needed to keep those programs alive and healthy. And I think that has a lot to do with it. I really have always believed as an educator that young people respond when they notice that the adults care about something. If whatever the adults value, then the students know that must be important. And I think that in this community there's a pervasive sense that the adults value the schools and value the educational experiences of our kids. So we're really blessed with that. And I think we'd all also tell you that we're blessed with some amazing teachers who do incredible things, and in circumstances where class sizes are getting bigger and resources are getting tougher to get your hands on, but they do miracles every day, and there's a high level of quality relationships that are developed between faculty members and classified employees and the kids that come to our classrooms every day. So it's just there's a lot of pieces that come together to make those kinds of things happen.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I think not only does our community value education, they demand high quality education. And frankly, that's a great thing. It puts pressure on us to keep up that standard of excellence. And I think that really has a lot to do with it. And then as Ralph said, the quality of staff that we have up here is extraordinary. And the people out there listening right now know if you weren't born in Nevada County, and probably most of you weren't, people come to this area because it's such a wonderful place to be, and that includes teachers. And so for a small rural area, we just have the creme de la creme of teachers and staff in this county, and that also results in, I think, an incredibly high standard of education.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think all of our schools in this county are outstanding. And I've been here 4 years now. When I applied for the job, one of the things I did look into and attracted me was I would hear about the outstanding community support and the families and the parents supporting it. Not just the outstanding teachers, but the whole myriad of everybody in the community supporting it, Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs. We have them coming into our programs, giving dictionaries and also supporting in the many other ways, and supporting in even landscaping projects. But it's a total community commitment, parent commitment, staff commitment, and it's all of our schools, and I'm extremely impressed, and that's why one of the reasons why our test scores and the high expectations is what John mentioned also is extended throughout our schools and the community. They expect it, and we expect it. So I think that's one of the reasons why we do so well.
Well, I don't want people listening to get the impression that everyone can just sit back and relax now that you know, the schools and the kids are in good hands, because one of the things that we're going to be experiencing is a tighter budget and more participation by parents, community, businesses, and so forth to help keep the expectations and the standards high.
Yeah, it is going to be a challenge, and just to put numbers on that, to make it real, as I was saying before, we are funded way under the national average, and that translates into a lack of funding of about $25,000 per classroom. As I said before, for every classroom in every classroom in California. The proposed cuts from the governor would result in an additional loss of $24,000 per classroom. So if those are implemented, we'll be funded at nearly $50,000 per classroom relative to other states. And so it is going to be a tremendous challenge. And on the one hand, I want to tell people, and I think we all want to tell people, that we'll keep the standard of education high and serve the kids well. But on the other hand, I don't want people to think that these cuts are going to be easy to sustain in education. These cuts will affect every district in the state of California and every student in the state of California to some degree, and that's the crime.
So maybe one of the jobs that parents and community members can shoulder is the idea that the governor's decisions with the legislature have not been finalized.
No.
We have state senators, state assemblymen, and women who represent us, as well as the governor who responds. So perhaps what people can do is register the need for increased funding.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really important to step forward and speak up about this. And it's been mentioned before about the declining enrollment in Nevada County, but I think it's really critical to realize that we have been in declining enrollment for many years now. So that means we've had less and less funding every single year in our county. And so we've already made the easy cuts. We've already cut the things that we can that the kids don't feel and that the schools don't feel. And so I think the important thing to realize is with the addition of continued declining enrollment and the governor's proposed cuts, we're going to have to start cutting deeper and deeper and make the harder choices. And the students will feel that, and I think it's important to get that message out. As high quality as our programs are and will continue to be, we'll feel the effects of that. And so absolutely, speaking to the legislature about that, I want to add one more thing. At the same time that we're faced with declining enrollment and we're faced with the budget cuts, we're also faced with higher accountability standards from No Child Left Behind. So our state and federal government require us not only to keep doing the job we're doing, but to do a better job all the time. So we're expected to do a better job with less.
Right.
And so it's very important for the community and families and teachers and administrators to speak out to their representatives about this.
And I think an important point to add on to that is that the governor has proposed 10% across the board cuts equally applied to all governmental agencies in the state of California. Yet the voters over and over have said that education and the children of this state, the future of this state, should be the top priority, or certainly one of the top priorities. So that's, as it goes into the political process, even the state budget analyst, Elizabeth Hill, who is nonpartisan, has recommended that the state prioritize cuts so that education and other top priorities aren't hit quite as hard as other agencies. Right now, just to put it in perspective, of all the state agencies in the state of California that are funded by this great state, there are only 2 that are funded at less than the national average relative to those agencies. And the 2 that are funded at less than the national average are transportation and education. So even though the voters are saying that education is a top priority, the state has not funded education as a top priority. In fact, as state revenues have increased in the last 8 years by 40%, education funding has increased by 30%, which is one of the lowest increases in the state. for a state agency. So that's a message that can be gotten across to our political representatives. If people feel that education should receive a higher priority and follow the mandate of the voters, that would be a good message to deliver.
Lou, I think that you were talking about what people can do, and I know our board passed a resolution that was forwarded to the governor and the leadership in both houses in Sacramento, and I would hope that other boards would consider that. But sometimes a letter coming from a person, a voter, to an assemblyman carries more weight than people might realize sometimes, or a phone call to their office, and we would encourage people who care about these issues to take the time to get that out there. Another thing that is interesting is, we've had feedback from the community, and people have stepped forward and offered suggestions on things that we might consider as ways to try to get through these tough, difficult times economically. And we've begun some real good conversations on creative responses to budget reductions and things like conserving energy and recycling and doing things that might be beneficial to our community and save us money in the process. So again, that's that energy, the positive energy of our community will help us all, I think, get through this budget crunch.
I think one thing people need to understand also is that our costs are increasing. If we can hold the line right now and use one-time money to address this budget problem, we still have increased special ed costs that are going up, which aren't funded by the federal government as they're supposed to be. We also have more and more autistic kids that are coming in, which need some special services. Also, we're finding that we're having more diabetic kids and other kids that have needs in the health area, which are costing the district, and we're needing nursing funding. So I think the public needs to understand that we have more and more costs coming, and we're being held accountable academically, which is great, and we agree with all that, but we also need to have the funding to be supporting not just the academics, but also the special ed needs, the special needs that we have facing our schools today.
And if I could finish with one last point, we do welcome the accountability. It's great. And we also recognize that education has to bear some of the brunt of the budget cuts because we are a large state agency. But it should be a fair share of the budget cuts.
Well, I want to thank you all. The program has reached its conclusion, and I also want to be sure to invite you back for hopefully better news in the future, but at least keep us posted on what's happening in the world of education and with our students. I'd like to come back and highlight some of the great programs that are happening in the schools, and so please return.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That'd be a pleasure.
And I'd also like to thank our crew of volunteers, Gail Woodman and Honor Omez, Bill Carquest, Richard Monroe, Marilyn Blom. I want to thank you all and invite you to become a member of NCTV and to support our efforts. We're here as a public service, and thanks for watching.